Hi, welcome to the Hardware Software Co-Design for HAI Lecture 2, and today we'll be discussing about the computational blocks of deep learning. So here we'll be beginning with a basic understanding of linear neural network, and then we'll progress on to actually explore convolutional neural networks, which is something which will be extensively dealing with the later part of this course, because most of the machine learning models which you're going to deploy will be vision based, and convolutional neural network is an inherent part of it. All right, so let's get started. So as a very basic intro about uh, what actually is the fundamental building block of a neural network is a what we call as a node. In biology, this is what is represented as neurons. So the basic thing is that if a signal is coming from here, then it gets passed on based on certain inputs here, like certain cell bodies here, which gets activated only when the signal here is strong. And then the combined signal of this is together read. So these are known as dendrites, and this joint is known as synapse. And if the activation function is high, if the signal is sufficient enough, then this gets further activated and this is further transmitted. So these are certain signals which how our brain perceives things. And over time, these synapses are actually trained, and that's how we actually learn to perceive or do the perception around us. Same thing goes in here. The inputs, these are marked as x0, x1, x2, get multiplied by a weight w0, w1, w2. So together this is the value which is going inside, and this acts as a cell body. So we do a summation of all these things and we add it with a bias, and finally we apply a function onto it, an activation function on it. So this activation function can be like linear, can be quadratic, or can be some trigonometric function. Point being that it gives us an activation function whether to send this to the output or not. So this is a fundamental building block of a machine learning model. Then comes what are deep neural networks. So when we apply this concept to multiple layers, then it forms a deep neural network. So here these are the nodes which we are indicating, right? The inputs, and these lines represent the weight. So for each of these nodes which you're seeing in the output, there are inputs coming from different nodes in the input layer, and together they are summed and an activation function is applied. Now in the next layer, again based on these activation functions, so for a single node in the layer after that, the input is coming from multiple sources, and again the same operation happens here. For calculating the final output, you can see that again this operation is happening. So the dimensionality of these hidden layers determines the width of the model, that how wide the model is. So let's first of all come to understanding the shape of tensors. So here, as I said, we'll be discussing first of all a linear layer, which is the most fundamental, connected nodes together formed, as we were seeing in the last few slides. So here the input feature is represented by a vector x. So this represents the rows and this represents the column. Here we have deliberately marked this as 1 just to indicate that it's a single input which is coming here. So how will we represent this x as ci inputs coming here, and then what we have in our control. So the inputs which are coming in is not in our control. What we have in our control is the number of outputs. So we can determine what must be the length of CO. So in this case, you can see that, okay, if I want CO to be 3, then based on that, we can determine the dimensionality of our weight matrix. Now, as a convention, we always input. So this is something which we do to maintain hierarchy and for our ease of understanding. The columns in this are represented by the input layer, and the rows are represented by how many output dimensions you want. So naturally, if you want to multiply, we'll have to do a transpose of this weight matrix, and then you can see the dimensions would match. And finally, what we'll get in the output is 1 cross CO. And then for each of these terms, we can add a bias. So this is why the dimension of bias is also CO. So I hope you understand these dimensions, how they are written. It's very important for us to understand and learn how to calculate these dimensions, because later on they'll form a very important part of our deployed model, that how many computations we're having, how many multiply and accumulation operations we're having, right? So this we'll actually do in the third lecture of calculating the metrics. Then as a convention, like because our GPU size is large and it will be a huge waste of resources if we just input one input image at a time. And also mathematically it's proven that if we input multiple images at a time and then we together calculate the output and the loss function, like independent outputs for each of these, and we do some statistics on it, then it gives better results as well, and also it is much more efficient in terms of computation for the GPU. Sorry, right? So here n represents the batch size. N here is representing the batch size. Alright. So you can see that the dimensions have expanded here, and you cannot unlimitedly increase the batch size. It's also a parameter which you can train it on, which you have to decide. Now comes the convolutional layer, convolution operation. So whenever we come to vision models or dealing with vision based things, images, we tend to look to convolutional layers for making us understand our image better, and this we have seen in the last lecture as well, about when we were discussing how AlexNet uses convolutional layers. So here the output neuron is connected to input neuron in the receptive field. This concept of receptive field we'll understand, but first we'll have to understand the dimensions of it, right? So the input feature here, so if we're talking about 1D convolution, you'll understand why we're calling it 1D. So there are two things in this. One is the channel dimension, another one is the spatial dimension. So channel dimension is what determines the depth of the layer. So in general, if it is like, let's say, an RGB image, so the number of channels here is 3. Now number of channels is equal to 3. Now this is the input. So the size of the input you can see is spatial dimensions cross channel dimensions. So in 1D convolution we can simply say, if we represent this as Ci and this as Wi, and there are input sizes as n batch size. So n here represents just the batch size, so nothing more than that. So if here there is n, and output also we'll write n. If here it is 1, then output also we'll just have 1. Now in our end, as I told you, we have the capability of deciding that what is the CO and WO which we want. Output is something which is in our control, and we can decide what how many outputs we want. And based on the choice we have made of CO and WO, we need to actually determine the size of the filter. All right. So here the Ci of the filter has to match with the channel dimensions of the input. So the depth of this filter is matching with the channel dimension. So here that's why it's known as 1D convolution, because only in one direction you have the capability of moving the filter, which is in this direction. Therefore it is known as 1D. So here you can see that there are 3 blocks here, and here there are 5 blocks. So if I place the filter on top of this and do a convolution operation simply means I multiply this element by this element, added with this element multiplied by this element multiplied by this element, and so on. So it's like an element by element multiplication and accumulation, and together this gives me a single pixel, a single value in the output. Alright. So to understand this better, if there are for a single filter I get a single pixel. Now if there are multiple such filters, then for each filter I get one pixel each, right? And then what I need to do is move all these filters in this direction, in the spatial dimension. So for each time I move, I get a new value, and then what you can observe in the output is this CO, the channel on the output, and the WO. This is in our control, right? So based on this, if my if I want a particular CO, then that many filters I need to choose in my as a number of filters, because that is how I'm generating my channel dimension in the output. If we extend the same concept and based on the W, I have to choose KW. There is a mathematical relationship which will make more clear after we study the 2D convolution. So in 2D convolution, as I said, the channel dimension has to match the filters, the filters channel dimension depth has to match with the input channel dimension. And what we have the flexibility is to move this filter in this direction and in this direction, the spatial directions. So therefore this is known as 2D convolution. So ignoring this n, if we have the channel input as Ci, and then the height of the input and Wi, so this is Hi and this is width I, right? So this is how the input feature is annotated. This is the shape of it. Then the output, we have the choice of deciding what is the CO which I want, what is the HO I want, and what is the WO I want. And based on the choice which I make, I need to decide the number of filters and the KH and KW of the filter. Okay. So as we had seen in the last slide that the channel dimension of the filter has to match with the input. So this Ci is clear, and the number of such filters is determined by what is the output I want. So therefore this CO is coming here, and KH and KW are mathematically related to HO and WO and HI and WI, right? So what will be the height and width of the filter, that we have the flexibility of choosing. So if let's say that KH and KW are given, or we have figured out what KH KW we want. If we figured out, sorry. So if this is given KH and KW, then based on that we can calculate, and based on the number of filters we have. So one thing short, that CO has to match with this CO, the number which is coming in the output, and what will be the height and width of the output layer determines is directly in relationship with KH and KW. So as I told that if we know our HO and if we know our HI, then we can calculate KH, and the relationship between, or vice versa, that if we know our HI and if we know our KH, then we can figure out what will be the output height. So in general, like if we are mentioned, so when we are doing a neural architecture search, which is another topic in itself, in that we'll study that how these filter sizes are determined, that you'll see certain models in the later half of this lecture. We'll be discussing mobile net and ResNet, and then we'll see that how are the output channels, the height and width of the convolutions are decided, right? So if we take the example of this 1D convolution, and this is my input HI, and I need to calculate my HO, and I know the size of the filter, that what is the size of my filter. So in this case you can see that filter we have marked here, and based on that we are getting this output. So if I have to determine, let's say that if this filter is going in this direction, then you can easily see that this value is coming from here, and the next value would come when I slided my window filter here. Then this value would come when my filter is slided here and doing convolution here, and this thing would map here, right? So here in this diagram it's little dirty actually, let me just erase it. But this is a very simple formula to figure out how to address this. So if I have to calculate the output dimension, what I'll take is I'll take the input dimension of the dimension which we have, and then I'll subtract this KH from it, the height of that dimension of the kernel of the filter, and then I'll do a +1 to it, because it's it's very straightforward to think it, that how many possibilities I have to move. So if this is the starting point of the filter, then this point can at max reach to what point. So from this direction it can reach up to minus kh height, and then we need to do to plus 1 in order to compensate for this extra 1 box which we had calculated earlier. You just need to actually pause the video and think about it. It's a very simple, straightforward formula. So based on that formula we get HO equal to WO is equal to 4 minus 3 plus 1, which is 2. So many times what happens is that inherently the number in the output will shrink down if we just do not, like, if we just take any filter, it will shrink down. But sometimes we want to maintain it. So we want more flexibility actually in determining that what output is possible with me, output dimension is possible with me. So padding can be used to keep the output feature map size is the same as the input feature map size. And zero padding pads the input boundaries with 0. So this is the default padding, that if this is your input, then you can pad it with zeros depending on how much padding you do. There are different types of paddings actually: zero padding, reflection padding, and replication padding. So in zero padding, you add zeros altogether. In reflection padding, whatever dimension you're seeing, you just do a reflection of it. So if it is 159, then you just reflect it about this point, which is 59. Or here if it is 147, then you reflect it about this box, 47. So this is how you actually do the reflection padding. And then there is replication padding, that whatever is the lowest closest box to any element, you just replicate that in all the boxes. So this is how you do reflection padding. Zero padding is the most common one which we use, and you can figure out that. Here now if you mathematically try to see that if you have added the padding, then we basically have done nothing but added certain padded box extra, 2 times of the padded box. So whatever our original HI was, this has to be added with 2 times the padding, and padding we are referring to single direction in which we have added. So HI plus 2p, and then the same formula of minus kh plus 1 to compensate for the initial box which we are calculating. So here you can do it with padding. Now is a good time to actually discuss about the receptive field of a convolution layer. So as the deeper we go into the convolution, so a single pixel which is there in, let's say this is layer 3 now. So this we are calling as the input layer. This is layer 1, layer 2 and layer 3. So if we pick up a box in, let's say, layer 2, then how many pixels in the original input layer are affecting this pixel? So if we assume the filter size here, let's say it's kh cross kw is given, but if we take it to be 3 cross 3, then this single pixel is actually coming from these pixels here. How many pixels? Kh cross kw. In this case, k is equal to 3, so therefore 3 cross 3 pixels each of this is coming from. Now in turn, this single pixel from here is again coming from a 3 cross 3 pixel here, but together when seen, that how many of all these pixels are formed together. So this pixel is actually forming, if you notice, this pixel is coming from this 3 cross 3 box, right? So together, how many? 5 pixels. So a single pixel here is affected by 5 pixels here. Now if we go to L equal to 3, then the range just increases. So here it shows clearly that this is the last box here which is getting mapped to here, and amongst this also this last box here is getting mapped to here. So with each successive layer, the dimensions in the receptive field keeps on increasing. So the more the number of layers you have in your neural network, the higher the receptive field from the input image becomes. So it's like if you analyze just a single pixel here in layer 3, you're basically analyzing a lot of pixels in your original input image. And that's why whenever we go deeper into the neural network, we start figuring out things as a whole. But when we are in the initial layers, if you remember our last example in the last class which we had discussed, that in the first layer we just started to detect the edges, but by the layer 5 of AlexNet, we were started to detecting high level features like coat of people, dogs, faces, etc. Right? So receptive field size is always calculated from the perspective of the input layer. So if L is equal to, let's say, 2, so layer 1, layer 2, if L is equal to 2 and the kernel width which you chosen is 3, then the receptive field size would be put it in this formula, that for each convolution we have k minus 1 receptive field size. With L here the receptive field size would be L k minus 1 plus 1. So this plus 1 is just to compensate the initial, like the pixel which is we are doing, which is under our consideration. Just to compensate for that, we add plus 1. So number of layers k minus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So here it's, since it's 3 and the layer we're looking at is 2. So answer would be 2 into 2 plus 1, 5. So a single pixel here is coming from 5 cross 5 pixels here, as we had seen that a single pixel here. And if our layer L is equal to 3, let's say, then according to the formula the receptive field size is 7. So in the original input image, a 7 cross 7 is actually giving you this single pixel. So for large images, we need many layers for each compute to see the whole image. So that's why there's like, we have to go deeper and deeper, and that's why you see such deep neural networks. So one solution is downsample inside the neural network. So receptive field is not how to downsample the image so that you increase the receptive field size without increasing too many layers, because it's like, you just cannot go on increasing the layers. So one efficient way of actually seeing the whole picture and downsampling quickly is by using strided convolution. So here, not once you have the padding, stride just refers to at what step size this would go forward. So if the stride is 1, then each time this block is shifted by just 1 pixel. But if the stride is 2, then every time it's shifted by 2 pixels. So as you see that the more the stride is, and in division wise, the smaller the HO would get. So in just one single layer, you can get a receptive field size of 7. So initially, if you notice, with stride S is equal to 2, and for only for L equal to 2, only we're getting a receptive field size of 7, which we were getting with 3 layers in the previous diagram, if you notice. Here for L equal to 3, the receptive field was 7, but by using strides, we can get the receptive field as 7. How do we calculate this again? So the answer is simple, that if we have a padding, then I told you that hi plus 2p is with padding. We subtract it with kh, which is the height or the width of the kernel which we are convoluting, doing the moving filter, and we divide the whole thing by s, because this is the step size, right? So it has to be divided. So the final formula of the output which you calculate is hi plus 2p minus kh upon s plus 1. So remember this is very important for calculating the dimensions, and it's a nice thing to understand. Then we discussed two concepts of group convolution layer and depth-wise convolution layer, which are like in extreme examples, but are quite used in machine learning models. Sometimes some of the machine learning models which we use. So what happens here, try to understand the concept of group convolution. So if there is this whole image, and this part of the image, let's say left part of the image is not connected with the right part, not at all connected, like, then why do you need to do actually convolution operations from those which, like, cross convolution things? In fact, this is much more relevant. Instead of understanding left and right, if there are 3 different channels, RGB channel, let's say, then why do we need like a convolution which is looking at all these 3 dimensions together? So instead we can create, so in the previous discussion what we had said was that this channel dimension Ci has to match with the channel input of the filter which we are convolving it with, right? This Ci has to match with this Ci. But now what we're saying is that we'll do grouping. That okay, we'll divide this into two parts. One part this filter will handle, and the other part this filter will handle, right? So we are making two groups. If so, a simple calculation I'll show you, that here originally the input channels, if they were not grouped together, was totally 1 2 3 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16. So total 16. And for each of these channels, since it's just a single pixel which we've drawn here, for each of these channels the convolution happens between all these blocks. So there are so many weights to actually multiply. How many? 16 cross 16. So total number of computations which will be happening is 256. But if we divide it into two groups, actually the channels into two groups, then the convolution, these connections will not exist, neither these connections will exist. So it's like we have decoupled these two groups. So these are 8 input channels here and 8 output channels. So total number of computations is 64 here and 64 here. Together how many? 128. So by using a grouping of 2, g equal to 2, we have brought down the number of computations. So unnecessarily the channels across the image, or as we go deeper into the neural network, so many of these channels are not actually related together. There is no such thing that okay, you have to take all of them together. So what you try is you try to make groupings and you do group convolution layer. So here the input feature will remain the same, output will also remain the same. What will change is the weights which we are having. So they will be reduced by a factor of g. So both input and output will be reduced by a number of g. But since there are groups now, so we'll have to multiply this by again a g factor here. So ultimately the number of computations which is happening is only affected by a single factor of g, the number of groups which you formed. So in this case, if g is equal to 2 and ci was 16 and co was 16, right? So the total number of computations which has to happen is 16 cross 16 divided by g. So a factor of g would bring into the reduction, which is 128 as we calculated here. Depth-wise convolution is nothing but an extreme example in which we decouple all the channels. So if this is, let's say, an RGB image, so R, G and B we individually take together. Initially what we were doing, this Ci has to be mapped to the kernels, the filters Ci. But now, since each of these we are taking independently, so Ci is basically right now, let's say, like, just it's a figure, it's a value, but we are decoupling this right now. So each of this is acting differently, and for each of these channels, the depth of the convolution here would also be reduced to just single one only. So how we represent this? The input features nonetheless remain the same, Ci, Hi, Wi, and N represents total number of inputs, the batch size, and output also we are looking at in the same way, that how the outputs are, that is also remaining the same. We have the choice of that. But the weights, how the weights are constructed will change entirely. So here they will have only just one dimension, kh, kw. So if this height, width, kw, in this dimension, the channel dimension, there is no such thing. So the channel dimension is just one single thing. And total how many such channels we have based on the number of outputs we want, CO. So here Ci is equal to CO is equal to the number of groups which we are forming. So this is the extreme example. And why depth-wise convolution? Because it reduces the number of computations, which we will see later on. Now another way to actually downsample the feature map is by using the pooling layer. Downsample the feature map to a smaller size, because ultimately we want to reduce the number of computations and we want to increase the receptive field, right? So the output neuron pools the features in the receptive field similar to convolution. But the best part about using pooling layer, well, I'll explain you what pooling layer is. Basically, let's just first discuss what pooling layer is. So here is your input, and what you do is make a stride equal to kernel size is equal to 2. So first this matrix is analyzed, these values are analyzed, and we do max pooling. If you do max pooling, we choose just the max element of it and we place it as the next layer. So this is the next layer. If this is L equal to 1, so this is L equal to 2. if 1735, we choose the maximum 7. Here 0, 2, 2, 8, so we choose 8, and here 3, 1, 1, 3, so we choose 3. So going from first layer to second layer, we have brought down the channel dimensions. And what is the receptive field here? KH, how many layers you've gone into KH minus 1 plus 1, right? So here, since it's 2, so 2 minus 1 plus 1, this will cancel, so receptive field size is 2. So each of these things is coming from a 2 cross 2 thing here. So receptive field, this calculation you can easily understand once you become familiar. But a very important thing here is that we can do the same operation of reducing the down sampling the image, so that the receptive field is 2 for the layer, 2 cross 2. But the special part is that there are no learnable parameters here. So computationally it's not expensive, but it is still downsampling it. So you don't need to actually train these many parameters, these many weight matrices or the kernels, because ultimately what is getting trained is this kernel values which we are multiplying with the input to generate the output, right? These weight values is what we are actually multiplying. But here there are no learnable parameters, so we just downsampling without putting any extra effort. Therefore pooling layer is quite common. One another layer which is very common in machine learning, which we'll again and again see, is normalization layer. So what we try to do is normalizing the features, and it helps optimize the machine learning faster. So it helps us to optimize the machine learning model. What we try to do is we try to make the mean as 0 of the input features. So, and we try to make the variance as 1. So for doing this, what we need to do is whatever the inputs are given, we have to subtract them with the mean, so that the mean of the final thing becomes 0, and we divide it by the standard deviation, so that the variance is 1. Now depending on what are the input set, the set of pixels we choose to do these operations, based on that we call it batch normalization, layer normalization, instance normalization, or group normalization. Okay, so before we come to this point, let's first of all actually learn about batch normalization. So in batch normalization, what you do is, so this is the channel dimension which you have, and then you have a spatial dimensions. So this represents the channel dimension, and the spatial dimensions together are clubbed as H cross W, and they can be based on the number of features or the inputs which you have. This can be as many, but they're just represented as a single dimension, which is spatial dimension. So right now we have just 3 dimensions for representation: spatial dimension, channel dimension, and batch dimension. Out of it, spatial dimension can internally have multiple such parameters based on the size. In general, it will be just H cross W for the input. So what we do is we pick up a single channel, let's say that it is RGB, right? So we just pick up one single blue channel of all the images which we see across the batch, and on that we take that as a set of pixels, and we do these mathematical operations on that. So this is known as batch normalization. Then what is layer normalization? Layer normalization is when on a single input, I try to normalize the set of pixels across the channels, all the channels, like RGB channels, whatever RGB channels are there in the single image, I try to normalize that. That one is layer normalization. Instance normalization is that across that channel only, and in that one single input image I am doing that, so that is instance normalization. And group normalization, we have a grouping. So on different definitions of the set, so based on the set we choose, you can see the grouping here. What actually is very interesting, and those who want to go actually a little deep into machine learning should realize that what are the trainable parameters here. So this normalization, what it is doing is learns per channel linear transformation. So for a linear transformation, how many trainable parameters we have? A scale gamma and a shift beta. It's a standard terminology used to compensate for the possible loss of representational ability. So now once we do the batch normalization, we see that the input image, the input thing xi, and this gamma IC plus beta IC, the scale and the shift. they are actually forming the output y. In many times you'll see that there are certain transformations which lead to scaling, and when we do certain mathematical optimizations and operations like quantization, there'll be inherently some scaling factors and certain shifts which will be coming. So together we can actually club them together and just make a single batch normalization. So anytime we're doing the quantization step or doing some operation of transformation, and we can club together all the scalable parameters and the shift parameters in a single equation here. So since we've discussed one of the most difficult parts till now, and it's almost like 35-minute lecture, now in the next few minutes we'll try to quickly understand some popular CNN architectures. But before we delve into that, I want to show you different activation functions here. So it's good that you remember this, that these activation functions, the nature of activation functions, it helps us to actually know whether, like, it is hardware friendly or not. Like this ReLU function is very hardware friendly, that the output y is just dependent on 0 comma x. So whatever this value comes, if it is negative, then it's basically taken as 0, and if it is positive, then it is taken it as it is. But there is a problem that this function is not differentiable here. So that we try to resolve by a swish function, which is defined as y is equal to x upon 1 plus e raised to the power minus x. Or a hard swish, which is defined like, which is made to be differentiable, is defined as 0 for x less than minus 3. So this is, point is that this is differentiable at this point, at x is equal to 3, this is differentiable here. So here you define as two constants, 0 and like a constant height, linear, but in between it follows this x upon x plus 3 by 6. So this is actually differentiable here. There is a ReLU 6 function which we sometimes use, that which caps down at a particular, let's say whatever value you have to choose to decide, you can cap it down to that. Sigmoid function is already quite famous, and leaky ReLU is also there, so you can study about these activation functions. So now we'll have a discussion about the popular CNN architectures, and what I would like to do is try to actually see first of all what a convolution this popular CNN architecture holds. So we have discussed this already, that input dimension is 224 plus 224. So, and if on that input image we do 96, we have 96 filters with stride 4 and padding 2, and size of each filter is 11 cross 11. Then what would be the output of this layer, this convolutional layer? So based on the exercise that you've already done, pause the video and try to figure out, try to actually, like, see for yourself that whether you're able to understand this concept or not. Then similarly, the max pooling would also do certain, would give you an output, as we had seen that it would downsample, help you downsample. So try to calculate that how max pooling is affecting you. Then again you see that there are 256 channels, each of 5 cross 5 convolution of padding 2, and the groups here are formed as 2. So grouping of 2. So what would be the output dimensions here? In total, by applying these many Alex and then later on, as we had discussed last time, 4096, 4096, and then just a channel linear layer of 1000. This is how this whole AlexNet is structured. So here, if you've paused the video, then it's good and try to solve it on your own, but I'll just help you understand right now how we're doing these things here. So here, this is the channel height and width. Now, if you have 96 channels in this layer, one thing which I'm sure of, that this output and the output before, like, so this thing is actually output. So I just need to actually, like, for your better understanding, I need to just shift it down a little bit, so that you can understand that this is actually in the output of this channel. So this is defining the filter, and this is telling you the output of the layer. So if there are 96 channels, so definitely the number of channels in this would become 96. Then the height and width of the output is determined by two things: the kernel height and kernel width, and the input height and the input width. So here we have the simple formula that we have seen, that just plug in 224, which is HI, here 224, which is HI. You do the padding. So padding here given as 2. So plus 2 into 2 minus the height of the kernel, which is 11, and divided by the number of strides plus 1, 55. So this 55 is the height and the width, which is after of the output channel. So 96 cross 55 cross 55. Now this becomes the input to the max pooling layer with stride 2. So what we had studied about about max pooling, that it is basically having padding of 0. Max pool was what? That we did not pad anything and we just were doing a striding operation with a filter. So it's a 3 cross 3 max pool. So the same formula would apply here. Instead of P, the P is 0 here. We have kernel height and we have a stride. So answer would come out to be 27. So 27 becomes the height and the width of the output of this after this max pooling thing is done. But the number of channels, since on all channels this has happened, so therefore the number of channels remains same across max pooling. Then we have 256 filters, so definitely the output will be 256, and padding and grouping is 2. So you apply the same formula here, that 256, and then based on this formula, here the input dimension is 27, right? So this thing HI is basically 27 in this case. And then we have the kernel height of 5. Here the grouping is of 2, and here grouping basically you can take it as reference to the padding which we are doing. The number of groups is affecting the padding, and stride is here just 1. So here this thing 1 goes here. So if you apply the formula, you get 27. So 27 cross 27. So this becomes the input to the max pooling layer with stride 2. So again quickly applying the formula, 27 plus 0 minus 3. Why 3? Because the kernel height is 3 coming here, divided by 2, because the number of strides is 2 plus 1, 13. And the number of channel dimensions gets copied as it is. So across whatever is the channel dimension input here, after the max pooling layer, it will remain the same, right? And you can simply do all these calculations and you can figure out that if there are 384 channels mentioned here, then there will be 384, like since channels mentioned here 384, which basically means number of filters, right? So here 384 will come, here 256 is mentioned, so therefore 256 channels will be there, and each of these things you can see they have maintained the same across, like these, they have chosen the padding and grouping in such a way and the number of strides so that the dimensions are maintained, only the channels are varied across all these convolution layers. And finally, if we flatten out this layer, 256 into 6 into 6, it will give us a 4096 vector, 4096, and then in the final output we can divide it into 1000 classes. An advancement of AlexNet was VDD16, in which they tried to do certain modifications. So here they chose a standard size of 3 cross 3 convolution, which you see here, and a standard size of 2 cross 2 max pooling. So no such thing as 11 cross 3 convolution, then 5 cross 5 convolution, then 3 cross 3 again, and then etc, etc. So they chose standard computational blocks. And since there were 16 layers, so you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There were total 16 layers, therefore they are called VDD16. The pool, so 16 layers which have trainable parameters inside them. Max pooling, as we discussed, has no trainable parameters, therefore it's not counted here. So it's total 16 layers. And then each of these, for the convolution channels, beside doing the convolution, which is only the convolution will affect here the dimensions, right? The batch normalization and the ReLU do not affect the dimension per se. They're just affecting the value. They're just affecting the value, but they're not affecting the dimension. Whatever the dimension comes, that same dimension, after doing the batch normalization, remains. It retains. The shape retains. Then we look at another architecture, which is ResNet 50, which is quite a famous architecture for doing image classification tasks, object detection tasks as well. So here they use a bottleneck block. In a moment we'll describe what a bottleneck block looks like, but they use this repeated structure. So we've drawn two kinds, one in blue and one in green. We'll see a difference in a while of what is the difference. And then they do an average pooling and then a linear channel of 1000 in the end. So this green channel, what it does is it has a residual branch where the name resonate comes from. The intuition about the residual branch, I'll try to give it in some other lecture, not right now, it's not possible, but why this residual branch is used, it has a good intuition behind it. And in this bottleneck layer, what happens is that we begin with a channel dimension, let's say n. Then since the output, by doing any convolution layer, as I told, the CO is in our hand, like, you know, how much we want the CO to be. So what we try to do is whatever features channel we begin with n, we reduce it to n by 4, and then we look at a 3x3 convolution, because 3x3 convolution is very expensive. If there is an image, let's say having 9 pixels, and I tell you to do a 1x1 convolution on it. So how many total computations you will have? So there will be first filter, then if you move, so total number of 9 MAC operations you have, multiply and accumulation. But if you have a 3x3 filter, or in this case a 2x2 filter, let's say, right? So in the first instance itself, how many calculations you have to do? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 MACs. Now the second time again 4 plus 4, then when it is here plus 4, and then plus 4. So the more the convolution size is, the number of computations will increase, the more your kernel height and width is, kernel height, kernel width is. So what we try to do is we try to reduce the downsample the features, the image, by using 1x1 convolution. We bring it down, then we apply the 3x3 convolution, so that we can look at the image as a whole, as like, you know, whole together, and increase the receptive field of it. And then again 1x1 convolution, we match to the input dimensions n, and we concatenate it with the residual branch which it is coming. In this blue block, what we try to do is, so this is known as the bottleneck block. In this blue block we give it a stride as well. So by giving it a stride, so besides, like, you know, the channel n by 4 which it is forming and doing batch normalization ReLU, we do a stride of 2 and a padding of 1. There is an intuitive idea that why we try to do that, because there is an intuitive idea that why we try to do that, but nonetheless here also we take size as 2 and then we concatenate these branches. So this is the last metric thing which we have to see today. The mobile net architecture, which has an inverted bottleneck layer. So in mobile net, what we try to do is, instead of having a 3x3 convolution, what we try to do is a 3x3 depth-wise convolution, which we have discussed just few minutes back, what depth-wise convolution is. Why we try to do depth-wise convolution? Because it is very computationally friendly. Here all the channels are decoupled from each other, and therefore it's like an extreme example. You can see that in depth-wise convolution, the number of total operations. So we'll again revise this when we start discussing efficiency matrix and neural architecture search. But here you can see that the number of weights which have to be trained in total are C into KH into KW. Here it was G times CO, CI, KH, KW. Sorry, divided by G, not G, like G and 1G will cancel, so it is divided by G. And here it is in the normal convolution layer, it is simply CO into CI into KH into KW. So this is in the normal convolution layer. The number of weights you have to multiply. In group convolution, it gets divided by factor of G. And in depth-wise convolution, it just gets, like, you know, further divided by G. In this case, it is G is equal to C is equal to CO. So that's how efficient it is in terms of the number of weights which depth-wise convolution provides. So MobileNet also has this repeating structure that based on the input image which it is given, then we have certain convolutions defined given the height and width and the stride and the padding, then depthwise convolution, and then there's a repeated structure of this inverted bottleneck block. Sometimes we do it with a stride and sometimes we just do it based on the number of channels. Here the special thing to note actually is this inverted bottleneck structure. So it's not squeezing in, it's not like the number of dimensions are decreasing. Here the number of dimensions are increasing actually. Because we have to do a depthwise convolution, therefore it is increasing. And so here the number of channels increase from n to n into 6. And there we apply the 3 cross 3, here the channel increases to n into 6. There we apply a 3 cross 3 depthwise convolution, which you can see here in this block. And after that we again bring it down to n. It turns out that it is named MobileNet V2 because the total number of computational operations which it is doing is very less as compared to what you would have done if you would have just used a 3 cross 3 convolutional block. And this I am talking about on n. So therefore we increase the number of channels and then we apply this MobileNet V2, the depthwise convolution. So this is it for the lecture 2 guys. In lecture 3 we'll start discussing about the efficiency matrix. We'll look at what latency is, what throughput is, and latency versus throughput. We'll do some energy consumption calculations and the number of parameters, how to calculate the number of parameters for each of these operations, which I just did a while ago, but we'll do it more formally for each of these things. And then we'll come down to actually how to calculate the number of parameters which are there, total number of parameters. So that is based on the channels and the height and the width which we are having, right? And since as I told you that max pooling does not have any parameter to be trained, so therefore we just leave it like blank plus 0. We add all this together to get total number of parameters. They are defined how to have number of activations, how many number of activations we can have, and this way the total number of max which we have to multiply, then floating point operations, and then we'll start discussing about quantization. So that is for the lecture 2 guys. In lecture 3 as I told you, and in lecture 4 we'll begin with quantization of pruning. Thank you so much for your time.